We now look at exchange rate regimes, starting with when these are fixed. The fixed exchange rate regime that applied to most advanced countries from World War II until the early 1970s was called the Bretton Woods. Under this system, the participating countries established narrow bands within which they pegged the nominal exchange rate, epsilon, between their currency and the US dollar. Each country's central bank stood ready to buy or sell its currency at the rate of epsilon units per US dollar. Note that absolute power parity would make nominal exchange rates to equate price level differentials. If the exchange rate is fixed, then it must be that inflation across the two countries must equate. Remember, we had also found that nominal interest rate differentials equate the growth rate of nominal exchange rates. But if these are fixed, then it must follow that nominal interest rates must be the same. This is intuitive. If exchange rates are fixed, investing in country A or B must yield the same nominal return. Let's turn our look at the implications for monetary policy. Assume that the US is the home country and large enough not to be impacted by the small foreign country, the UK. Remember that the demand for money for the UK, where we already used the fact that under fixed exchange rates, nominal exchange rates must equate. If the absolute PPP condition holds, the foreign price level is given by the nominal exchange rate times the US price level, which turns the money demand equation into the following. Since epsilon is a fixed number, for a given level of real GDP, YF, there is a unique MF that must be circulating, and therefore the UK cannot freely choose the amount of money in circulation. This means that under a fixed exchange rate regime, a small open economy cannot independently use monetary policy as a stabilization tool. To see this, let's look at the simplified balance sheet of the Bank of England. Suppose the Bank of England increased MF by an open market purchase of UK government bonds. This is an increase in the liability sides of the central bank balance sheet above. This would lead to an increase in the UK price level. However, this would violate PPP, since the nominal exchange rate is fixed. An increase in the domestic price will lead UK households to move away from UK consumption of goods. This means they will exchange their pounds for dollars at the central bank, reverting the increase in MF and leading to a loss of reserves. The central bank might keep buying bonds to prevent this adjustment, a process called sterilization. However, this leads to a systematic loss in reserves, which ultimately will lead to a devaluation of the currency. Reserves, that is, assets the central bank holds that can use to buy other currencies or assets, are an important resource for exchange rate policy. This map shows existing reserves in gold and foreign currency for different countries. As you can see, these numbers can vary substantially. However, no matter how large these reserves may be, they can easily be exhausted if used to support unsustainable policies. In this figure, we can see what happened to Venezuela foreign currency holdings in just 4 years. Venezuela had a fixed exchange rate for almost 20 years with consecutive devaluations. But unsustainable economic policies have led the bolivar to be constantly overvalued, leading to enormous pressure on reserves. Let's now look at the advantage of holding a flexible exchange rate regime. The chief merit of freely fluctuating exchange rate is that the balance of payments, BOP, disequilibrium gets corrected automatically with a change in the exchange rate. If a BOP deficit arises, there would be an excess supply of home currency, leading to a fall in the exchange rate simply by the market forces of demand and supply. This makes export goods cheaper and import goods more expensive. As a result, exports tend to rise while imports tend to decline, thereby removing the deficit in the BOP account. Similarly, supply in the BOP account means excess demand for home currency and thus a rise in the exchange rate. This in turn encourages imports and discourages exports. As a result, the BOP account will reach equilibrium by the same logic. Thus, a flexible exchange rate regime leads to an automatic adjustment in the balance of payments without government intervention. In a regime of fixed exchange rate, the removal of balance of payments deficits requires the adoption of internal policies that may imply falling income and price level. In other words, pegged exchange rate requires a change in domestic macroeconomic policies like deflationary policies implying output reduction. But under a flexible exchange rate system, a government can adopt independent monetary policy. In other words, under this system of exchange rates, internal balance could be maintained by the government. It is further argued that, as it is a self-adjusting mechanism to restore balance of payments equilibrium, a government can put more effort in tackling internal problems of inflation, unemployment, etc. Another advantage of flexible exchange rate regimes is associated with the absorption of sudden shocks. In a flexible exchange rate, the domestic economy remains insulated from external shocks and pressures. Under this system, the threat of importing inflation from outside the country is minimum. In other words, price feedback effect is imperceptible. Lastly, it puts a much lower requirement on the buffer of foreign exchange reserves. Since the exchange rate is not pegged under the floating arrangement of exchange rate, the central bank of a country need not hold adequate foreign exchange reserves as a buffer against unforeseen developments in international trade. However, there are also disadvantages associated with floating exchange rate systems. A flexible exchange rate presents an atmosphere of uncertainty and confusion in trade and investment. Susceptibility to uncertainty is greater as soon as exchange rate fluctuates freely. Suppose an Indian citizen has dispatched an export invoice to foreign buyers, but the Indian exporters do not know at what price foreign currency will be converted into Indian currency. This kind of uncertainty hampers trade. However, such uncertainty can be largely minimized through forward exchange contracts. The uncertainty involved in this kind of exchange rate may cause trading community to lose some confidence in the system. Unregulated free-floating exchange rate often discourage foreign investment, as exchange rate becomes erratic and hence destabilizing. Because of the uncertainty associated with this exchange rate, involving profit and loss, implications of foreign investment deals, a country might experience the accumulation of capital. Hence, it is destabilizing in effect. Flexible exchange rates also encourage wide speculation, since foreign exchange prices are not known in advance as in fixed exchange rates. It can be argued that when the exchange rate tends to decline, speculators anticipate that it would continue to decline further and the possibility of the flight of money to another country will brighten. This will then cause a further fall in the exchange rate. Thus, the greater the speculation against the currency, the deeper the economic crisis. Lastly, by nature, flexible exchange rate is inflationary. As soon as the exchange rate falls, automatically imported goods become more expensive. High cost of imported goods then fuels inflationary tendencies. As depreciation of a currency makes imports costlier, the domestic economy faces both demand pull and cost push inflationary pressures. It is because of these drawbacks of the freely fluctuating exchange rate that countries attach importance to managed exchange rates, with their central banks buying and selling currencies in the foreign exchange market so as to moderate the degree of fluctuations.